Hello and welcome to this edition of Hocus Focus. I'm Sarah Mondaini.
And I'm Thomas Sheridan.
And welcome back to another episode. And wow, was last month a resounding success or what? And just blown out of the water, really. So thank you all so much for your support and appreciation for our HP Lovecraft special back in April. And Thomas and I both worked really hard on that episode. Well, we work hard on all the episodes, but the HP Lovecraft episode was something special. So thank you for watching that. And if you haven't seen it yet, make sure you watch it after you've watched this one. And Thomas, how have you been as always since last month?
I've been good. The weather's been a bit mad all over the place, but I can't really complain.
Yeah, we've had 4 seasons in a day here the last few weeks.
Yeah, I'm delighted with the Lovecraft special, how it came out. It looked fantastic. And I looked at the numbers. It was like 6,000, and it wasn't even a week yet, which is great for like a nearly 3-hour show. And there's so many comments, so many good comments in the comment section below it. So we'll probably do another special like it down the road. Sarah and I were thinking of people like maybe Stephen King and stuff like that, Bram Stoker, and a few other people.
Yeah, and it's great to read the comments and see how many people have now decided to pick up a Lovecraft story or to go and search out his work. So that's really, really encouraging. So I'm really happy about that. So let's get down to this month's business. And our first topic tonight covers the high strangeness and folklore of the moon. That beautiful silvery white ball was named simply the moon because people didn't know other moons existed until Galileo Galilei discovered 4 moons orbiting Jupiter in 1610. And some people can't stop looking at its beauty and feeling inspired by it. And there are even some people who believe it's a construct put there to enslave humanity. And tonight I want to talk about the various lunar folklore, the gods and the goddesses associated with the moon, and the power of moon magic and esoteric rituals, and how in the pagan tradition the moon is symbolic of mysticism, intuition and fertility. So there's quite a lot to unpack with tonight's first topic. And I want to begin with moon magic, which I practice on occasion myself. And I'm not talking about running sky-clad in the back garden or anything like that. Moon magic is much more subtle, and you can use the energy and phases of the moon to manifest intentions and perform rituals and magical workings. And since ancient times, the moon's phases have been associated with cycles of birth and growth and fruition and decay, which sort of mirror the rhythms of life really on Earth, as above, so below. And you can use the energy from these different phases in your own intentions. And you don't even have to go outside to do it either. You can do this in a meditation in your mind's eye. And it's more about the intent with this sort of work and not the theatrics. And many practitioners of moon magic set rituals and intentions with the moon's phases. So, for example, the new moon is a great time to set intentions and make plans for what you want out of life and getting ready to put those plans into action. And it's not about wishing and blind hope. Now, I use the new moon to decide what seeds I want to plant in the garden and to make a list to go and buy them, because my intention with that is to have a beautiful bounty of flowers and veg in the summer. And then I wait for the waxing moon, which symbolises growth and fertility, to sow the seeds. And to be honest, it hasn't failed me yet. And workings for abundance and prosperity can also be done during the waxing moon to attract growth. And also any workings for banishing negative influences can be done during the waning moon to release and let go of anything that no longer serves. And the full moon is an excellent time for manifestation and clear thinking or shedding light on a situation. And it can enhance psychic abilities, sensitivity and clarity, and that could well be a factor as to why Renfielding goes up during a full moon as well. You can also use magical correspondences, white or silver for the full moon, black for the new moon, and the colours corresponding to the work that you're doing for the phases in between. And there's also crystals such as moonstone, selenite and quartz, which can be used to just amplify intentions. Now, using colours and crystals in magical workings might sound a bit cosplay to some people, but they're used to set intentions rather than the actual crystal having a magical property itself. And correspondences in magic are really a great way to increase your own focus and intent. And I'd also go so far as to say it's really important to know astrologically what the position the moon is in before doing any manifestation work with it, because if astrologically the moon was, say, for example, in Mars, and you were working on wanting to meet new people, then because of Mars's aggressive energy, you just might be inviting aggressive personalities into your life. So it's not just a case of working on what you want when you want, but it's also important to do the work under the right lunar conditions. Now, we all have a relationship with the moon, whether people believe that or not. It regulates the tides, women's menstrual cycles, and everybody's moods. And there's also research going on into the links between the lunar phases and human fertility. And some studies have found that conception rates can vary according to lunar cycles, but mainstream science hasn't really, well, it's not really accepted this yet. And to be honest, I can't see Brian Cox endorsing this natural way of thinking or living, to be honest. Now, we need the moon because the tides would shrink without it, and that would affect the marine life and the animals that feed on them for their own survival. And the tides also mix cold Arctic waters with warmer waters from the tropics to help balance the temperatures. So the moon is vital to balancing conditions that make life on Earth possible. And that is one of the reasons why I don't personally buy into the theory that the moon is a construct to enslave humanity, because for me it's a magical celestial body that's integral to life on Earth. Now let's look at some lunar folklore. In Indo-European mythology, the hare is associated with the goddess Estra and the lunar cycle, and Estra is also associated with the moon, and she was a shapeshifter, and she took the shape of a hare at each full moon. And like Artemis, all hares were sacred to Estra, which made eating rabbits and hares quite a taboo food. And some of the ancients have claimed to see the image of a rabbit or a hare on the face of the moon. And in East Asian culture, the moon rabbit or jade rabbit lives on the moon and is seen or is said to be pounding a mortar and pestle. And in Chinese folklore, the image is seen as the rabbit pounding the elixir of life in his pestle for the goddess Chang. Now, in Buddhist folklore, a monkey, an otter, a jackal, and a rabbit become charitable on the day of the full moon. They decide to become kind because they believe a demonstration of great virtue would earn them a great reward. And when an old man begged for food, the monkey gathered fruits from the trees and the otter collected fish, while the jackal wrongfully stole a lizard and a pot of milk curd. And the rabbit, who only knew how to gather grass, didn't know what to do, so he offered its body by throwing itself into the fire. But the rabbit wasn't burned, and when the old man revealed himself to be a Sakra, which is a Buddhist deity, and because of the rabbit's virtue touched him so much, he drew the image of the rabbit on the moon for all the world to see. In Indigenous Australian cultures, the hare is seen as a guide to the spirit world, leading spirit travellers through the lunar landscape and into the afterlife. And in Greek and Roman mythology, the moon was personified as the goddess Selene in Greek or Luna in Roman. Now, Selene or Luna was shown as a beautiful goddess riding a chariot across the night sky, and she illuminated the world with her light. And there are lunar festivals such as the Feast of Selene, which were held to honour the moon goddess and to invoke blessings for fertility and prosperity and protection. In Hinduism, the moon is personified as the god Chandra, who is shown as a handsome deity adorned with a crescent moon on his forehead, and he's associated with emotions, intuition, and the mind. Now, lunar rituals such as the worship of Chandra on Mondays are performed to receive blessings for emotional well-being and spiritual growth. And now moving on to ancient Mesopotamia, the moon was worshipped as a deity known as Sin or Nana, and they believed that the moon controlled the cycles of nature and had a direct influence on human destiny. And the lunar phases were also closely observed for omens, and prophecies and rituals were often conducted to satisfy the moon god and seek his blessings. And in ancient China, there is a mid-autumn festival called the Moon Festival, one of the most important lunar festivals in the Chinese culture, and families gather together to give thanks for the harvest and to eat moon cakes and admire the beauty of the full moon. And as I mentioned previously, the moon is also associated with the figure of Chang, who's said to live on the moon with her companion, the jade rabbit, who grinds the elixir of life for her. So, as you can see, there's many magical aspects to the moon. It waxes, it wanes, it rises, it sets, and whether you are interested in it from an astrological or an astronomical point of view, it is a very beautiful and mysterious thing that has influenced humanity since the dawn of time. And tonight, I've looked at it from a pagan and folkloric point of view, because I feel that as fascinating as the science of the moon is, our show is more interested in its occultic aspects. So, Thomas, what are your thoughts on the moon?
When I was 11, I got a telescope for my birthday, and I literally jumped back from the eyepiece when I pointed it at the moon and saw the craters and everything so clear and so, vivid. I'd only ever seen them in photographs or illustrations, and it was startling experience to see. It was one of those things. It was real. It was very real to me. So ever since that moment, I had a very close connection to the moon. I've often wondered at its beauty. Love going out in the countryside under a full moon and seeing how light is very different, like how the negative spaces really come to life between trees and things like that. If you go to a graveyard, like an all Irish graveyard under a full moon, the gravestones there's something really magic about how the limestone catches the moonlight and gives that kind of gothic quality. Now, it will never not be amazing to me how the moon is perfectly sized and perfectly in the correct position to cause a total solar eclipse when it happens, to block out the sun perfectly. To me, that will never not be amazing. Now, that's one of the justifications people use to claim that it's an orbital satellite or something like that was brought in by aliens or something. Well, that to me proves that there is a magical destiny to the world and a magical construct to the cosmos. And this is why it frightens Christians and truthers, who are like a lot of them are Christians anyway, are the Abrahamic mind. They have a fear of the moon. And this fear of the moon becomes irrational. You know who else had a pathological fear of the moon? Adolf Hitler. He called it that pale, dead fellow in the sky, and he believed that there was some force on the moon that was impacted upon negativity for him anyway on this earth. It haunted him, the moon. So, I find it very interesting that all these people are afraid of the moon. They share that with Adolf Hitler. Now, the folklore one is interesting. The connection with hares is quite remarkable because it's so universal, even outside Indo-European mythology. And the hare in the Celtic world is associated with a shape-shifting witch who has a kind of a lycanthrope type thing, where she becomes like a werewolf under a full moon. She's able to shapeshift, and that's why in Ireland it was illegal to shoot a hare, because it might be a woman, and then a witch who would shapeshift, and it would be classified as murder. And it had, there are reported cases of hares being shot and they were being followed, and they found an injured woman with a bullet hole in their leg or something like that, lying where the hare should be. So that was a big thing in Irish folklore, the shapeshifter and witch becoming a hare. And as you said, she's connected with Selene, and she's connected to Luna, where we get the word Luna or lunar, lunatic, and all those, or the roots of all those words. And I find it very interesting that there's a beautifully romantic connotation within the Indo-European paganism element of the moon, and Hinduism as well, where the moon is very important on things like the eve of weddings and stuff like that. And they make a big deal of discovering the lunar cycles. Remember, our original calendar is a 13-month calendar that was a lunar calendar, which is still used in Judaism and in Hinduism. And also the woman's menstrual cycle being the same length as the moon. So it was naturally, it's always been associated with a woman for that reason alone. And that would have amazed our ancient ancestors when they realized that the lunar cycle and the woman's menstrual cycle were in balance. The moon has a very strange effects on the earth. A full moon will cause a high tide that will be higher than usual, but that does not make any scientific sense. Because it's just light that's coming. It's not like the moon is actually bigger. It's the same size moon, but it's just covered in light, and yet that high tide will be affected by a full moon, and no one knows why. It shouldn't happen. It's literally outside the laws of physics. And speaking of being outside the laws of physics, about 5 years ago, I would stop for breakfast at about 7, 8 in the morning on the motorway going into Sligo up here to get some coffee and a sandwich. And I swear to God, the man in the moon was on its side. I watch the moon all the time. I know about astronomy. I'm interested in astronomy. I can name what those shapes are on the moon. I can even name some of the craters, the big craters, no problem. The man in the moon was on its side. I can never been able to explain that. So another thing that happened to me was years ago, I had a dream that the Earth, life on Earth, was actually brought into creation by the moon, which was spooled into Earth orbit by humans, by an early form of consciousness living at the bottom of the ocean, and it wanted to regulate life on Earth, so it brought the moon in. And I got up and went out, and there, outside my window, was the moon rising over the Irish Sea. So I've had sort of like magical experiences with the moon, really powerful ones, and the moon has this energetic power that I don't get how people can see anything sinister with it. It seems to be only the Abrahamics that have a problem with it. Everyone else seems to like either worship it as a goddess or see it as vital in things like the growing of crops and so on.
It is beautiful, the moon, and I find that looking at it, I feel much more creative and get much more ideas and inspirations. I like sitting out in the sunshine, yes, but something special about going out when the moon is full, and especially like what you said, if you're on a ship or a boat and you're watching it bounce off the reflection, bounce off the water, there's just something very hypnotic about it. And I'm also fascinated by the light from the moon is coming from the sun, so we know the moon is actually, it's dark. It's a piece of rock in the sky, and it's the sun that makes it that beautiful silvery colour. Yet the moon, I like the way the moon comes to life at night time and just shines, and it's inspired poets and it's inspired writers and lovers, and I'm sure there's been many a proposal made under a bright silvery moon. I just think it's an absolute thing of beauty.
It's shiny because the surface is covered in glass. It's covered in huge amounts of glass, so that's why it's so incredibly reflective. Again, that's also a kind of it's too good to be an accident kind of thing. Another thing, it also appears to be hollow. About 10, 11 years ago, NASA crashed a spaceship into the moon with the specific brief of getting a kind of an ultrasound of the inside of the moon from the shock, and it rang like a bell. They said the moon rang like a bell. It's like it was hollow on the inside. Even that's strange. Now, another one too is that when I was researching for the film Lever Velocity about Jack Parsons, I went into the JPL archive of all the photographs taken on the moon. And this included most of the photographs we see from the moon are the best of the best. Lots of them are overexposed. The camera's on the wrong way. It's pointing at the sun. It's blurred. But I looked at every one of them, and I can tell you, the moon frightened me after a while. Just being there itself, it seemed like a haunted world. The actual moon itself. So while its effect on Earth, I see nothing but positive and beautiful things about it. I got the impression that the actual moon itself is a haunted realm. There is something there on the moon itself.
That's actually very interesting because I came across something after reading about the moon that actually relates to possibly what you've said, but also to our previous episode on H.P. Lovecraft. And as I was researching, I read about demons' horns being believed to symbolize the crescent moon. And in ancient times, people thought that the moon was where demons lived, not actually on the moon, but in the space between the moon and the earth. And they called it the sphere of the moon, or the starry region of the demons. And the horns were a symbol linked to the devil. And that's how the devil became associated with the moon. And there's a picture of the demon Belphegor. I hope I pronounced that right. And it's by the French demonologist Colin de Clancy, which I'm going to put on the screen now. Now, this picture, I saw it and I just thought, gosh, that looks familiar to me. Where have I seen that before? And then I realised it could actually have inspired H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos and his famous pencil drawing of Cthulhu sitting on the box bench. And the demon in that Clancy image, it doesn't want to draw attention to itself, but because he's a demon, he can't disguise himself completely, and he can't hide his horns or his cloven feet, and therefore he's got to go out into the world with these things showing. And I just thought that was similar to the concept of Cthulhu, who is a large human-like being, but with a tentacled face.
Yes. Another folkloric thing is things like moon-kissed water, where you put a jar of water out on the full moon and you let the moon's light absorb into it, and apparently it has healing properties and life-affirming properties. And also, people put their crystals out under the full moon to charge them.
Yes, now I do that myself. I wasn't sure whether to bring that in or not because I didn't want to sound too cosplay or too Wiccan. But yeah, I do the moon charged water sometimes, and I do I've got some geodes and I put those out to charge up, usually under the full moon or in a thunderstorm, one or the other.
And the moon has other effects associated with it too. Like, there's another mystery about the moon. It's so incredibly mysterious that when the moon is rising, it's gigantic on the horizon. And then it gets to its normal size as it starts to rise above the horizon. I remember seeing a moon here about 12 years ago rising over the mountains, and it was colossal. It was bigger than even I thought it was actually coming towards Earth. It was so big. That's not known why that happens. It's never been explained. Now, when I was growing up, I remember Patrick Moore on The Sky at Night saying it was because the Earth's atmosphere acts like a lens, so you get a kind of a magnification effect. That's been shown not to be true at all. No one knows for anything. In fact, they've only been able to use things like quantum theory to kind of explain it. So it's just one more thing that's so strange about the moon. It definitely seems to be related to the observer effect in many ways. It seems to be that the moon seems to have an experiential element for humans observing it.
Another interesting point. Now, I don't know where this originated from, but the man in the moon. I don't know where that came from, but it just strikes me as strange that it would be the man in the moon when the moon is in sync with the female menstrual cycle and is in pagan folklore and in the pantheon of gods. It represents the goddess Selene and Luna, and throughout all the pagan and classical world, really, it reflects different named female goddesses. So I don't quite understand where the man in the moon came from. I can get behind the hair in the moon, but not the man in the moon.
I've wondered about that too. It's always associated with a female, and if there's a male face in it. So that's an interesting one. And also, the ancients used to believe that the moon went to sleep in the sun, in the ocean. When it went down, it actually went into the sea. And I kind of found that was kind of cool as well. And so, because there is a strong connection between the moon and water anyway, like migration of fish, things like that. There's all kinds of fish that come to the surface of the ocean when there's a full moon and things like that, as almost as if these animals themselves are worshipping it or gaining something from it.
One thing I like about the moon and the sun, it shows us a lesson, and that is that the moon has its time to shine, and it shines because of the sun's reflection on it, and it comes across the sky, and then it sets, and then the sun rises and the sun shines, and neither one of them, you can't have one without the other, and neither one of them get in each other's way. They allow each other to shine and do what they need to do, and I just think that is a really good lesson, perhaps for people in the sense of jealousy or pettiness. I just think it's a good lesson.
Yeah, and it does affect people who have psychiatric problems or mental problems. There's no doubt about it. I've heard that firsthand from people who worked in hospitals. But what's interesting is that Renfield within the Bram Stoker's Dracula, he didn't actually Renfield when the moon was happening. He got messages from his master, so he was using it for a telepathic reason.
Yeah, and it's our symbol of it's symbolic of psychic ability and intuition and things like that. So telepathy as well would make sense in the story.
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't understand why it has an effect on psychic ability and it intensifies it. I can't quite get behind why. I know that it does, but I don't understand why. So if someone said, "Well, why do you think that?" I don't know. It's just one of those things that I know it happens, but I can't explain why, because I don't know. It's just one of those natural mysteries.
It's like the way that the full moon is exactly the same as a crescent moon. It's just the amount of light on it is different, and the light shouldn't affect anything to do with physical or biological things, but it does. It does, and it's one of the great mysteries of the moon.
So there we have it, the high strangeness of the moon and the folkloric elements of the moon and the gods and the goddesses of the moon. So we'd be interested to know how you feel about the moon. Does it affect you? Does it have an effect on your mood? Does it intensify your psychic abilities? Do you like to look at the moon? Perhaps you believe it was put there as a construct to enslave humanity. Whatever your feelings about the moon are, please let us know in the comments. We'd be very interested to read them.
On May 2nd, Pluto is going retrograde again until October 11th, by which time it will be in the last degree of Capricorn. I made a video about how this planet is represented and what it can mean globally, what implications its movements have, etc. But you have to know that Pluto is a very, very modern planet. It was only discovered in 1930. And therefore, we don't really have a lot of data to go by when it comes to actually visible or observable effects of this planet. Therefore, and also because of the fact that it's a generational planet, I don't think that this planet's retrograde motion is going to have a huge impact on us personally. On May 8th, we have a new moon in Taurus, which gets an extra post. And on May 23rd, we have a full moon in Sagittarius, which of course gets an extra post as well. On May 13th, Mercury leaves the post-retrograde shadow zone. So call your brokers, realtors, or wedding planners. You have the green light to go ahead again. Just kidding, you have to do whatever you have to do, be it Mercury retrograde or not. But caution is warranted because this period is notoriously capricious. On May 15th, Mercury enters Taurus. This planet rules the way we think and how our mind works, what we focus our communication and intellectual pursuits on. And in the fixed Earth sign Taurus, we have a very grounded, pragmatic, reality-oriented way of thinking, which is attracted to traditional values and modes. And this can give us a good perspective when it comes to financial or generally material things, because Taurus is concerned with physical and material well-being. Taurus is ruled by Venus and deals with money, the simple but soul-nourishing things in life, such as being surrounded by good friends or family, traditional family values, financial security, a comfortable home into which we can retreat, a more slow-paced and unpretentious but solid and most of all secure life. However, we also have Jupiter and Uranus in Taurus, which in combination can shake things up a bit. This could manifest very positively in a rational and goal-oriented approach to our finances. For example, if you've been looking into investing, you could have a really prudent and sober approach on the one hand, but on the other hand, also creative ideas that might be out of the box, but always with realism in mind, which is supported by a sextile between the Taurus planets and the planet of reason, Saturn. But slight warning is in order. Saturn is in Pisces currently, which is highly idealistic and not very structured. So you might want to double check everything before you buy into some grandiose idea. On May 20th, the sun enters Gemini. Gemini season is usually quite easygoing and pleasant, optimistic and lighthearted. The general mood is definitely pretty lighthearted, which I think we can all use now. This mutable air sign marks the season between spring and summer, where the weather conditions can get a bit erratic before settling into the more static conditions or stable heat, hopefully, of summer, hence the mutable nature of this sign. Because the zodiac sign falls into this transitory phase, which can be less predictable, the New Agers, in their infinite wisdom, have attributed unreliability, indecisiveness, disloyalty, and a whole plethora of untrustworthy characteristics to those born during Gemini season. Of course, the super original two-faced thing, usually overlooking or downplaying the positive traits. Gemini is one of the least popular signs in, tabloid astrology, but as always, these classifications are extremely superficial, which is kind of funny because Gemini people are said to be superficial, but this is said by the same people who fall for superficial zodiac labels, the irony being completely lost on them. The truth is that Gemini, like all air signs, is extremely perceptive and hard to fool, and therefore can see through manipulative actions or tactics more easily, especially since they don't attach themselves emotionally to an idea, and they usually don't tend to marry their opinions. They want to back them up with logic and reason. Another often overlooked quality is a highly psychic and imaginative character, along with a very sharp intellect, like all air signs. That doesn't mean that other signs aren't intelligent. It simply means that the air element represents the mind, and these attributes will translate to us regardless of the sign that we were born under, because the sun's transit as the embodiment of the vital essence brings these qualities into everyone's life to a degree. The mutable nature can bring some scattering of the mental and physical energy because the sign is inherently nervous and mentally overactive. This overactive potential needs to be channeled. It can be very refreshing and inspiring, unless you have an unbalanced lifestyle or a dominance of air or mutability in your chart, in which case you could feel more easily distracted and find it hard to wind down. Contrary to the cliche, Gemini doesn't have a constant need for socializing and talking because this sign can easily get depleted from interactions with dull or negative people. Gemini is susceptible to persistent ailments concerning the nerves, lungs, and irregular eating habits that drain the energy. And this season can put greater emphasis on self-care for all of us, being more selective with social contacts and being more active while respecting our body's need to get enough rest and a nourishing diet. If well balanced, Gemini is highly mentally flexible, original, emotionally detached but not cold, and when unbalanced, the negative stereotypes of being erratic or not knowing what you want can come to the surface, but this goes for every sign. When unregulated, the least evolved and least positive traits are expressed the most. On May 23rd, Venus enters Gemini, and on May 25th, Jupiter enters Gemini. Curiosity and flexibility are prevalent themes now. With Venus, we might feel more flirty than usual or have a greater sense of playfulness in our relationship. We can develop a wider range of interests, which can go for hobbies or social circles. With Jupiter amplifying the sign's qualities, the intellectual and creative faculties will be even more emphasized, which can lead to making very valuable contacts, especially if you're seeking new clients as a business person or you want to broaden your horizons. Jupiter favors learning and accumulating wisdom and knowledge. So whatever your ambitions are, they can be greatly fueled by this placement. However, Jupiter is in detriment in Gemini, meaning the nature of the sign doesn't quite agree with the nature of the planet. This means that the negative potentials of Gemini can also be intensified, which could be great motivation, but not too much stamina, lack of realism or practicality, too much gossip instead of quality information and communication, or a highly nervous disposition that can't seem to focus or take decisive action. Therefore, it's important to not waste our energy on things and people that aren't worthwhile and be extra discerning when it comes to what's good for our health, mind, and soul. Avoid mental overstimulation and too much physical stress. Seek out the acquisition of knowledge and useful information and try to shield yourself from the noise. This goes for the psychic sphere in particular, as you might feel more open and receptive to outside influences and fluctuations. The social media sphere might be more inundated than usual with babblers and posers. Try not to accomplish too many things or absorb too much information at once. You can't spread yourself too thin without also losing some of your essence in the process. Therefore, choose wisely. If you'd like a personalized forecast that is tailored to your own birth chart, I can give you an outlook on how short-term or long-term planetary transits, a new moon, full moon, eclipse, etc., any other astrological event can affect you, which of course is going to be much more detailed than the general forecast. Visit my website if you would like to book a reading with me. And you can also find my social media channels, which you can follow if you're so inclined. See you next month.
Tonight we are reviewing the 1958 film Blood of the Vampire, directed by Henry Cass and starring Donald Wolfett, Barbara Shelley and Vincent Ball, and it was produced by Tempian Films, but it does have, in my opinion, it does have a Hammer sort of carry-on film feel to it in parts. And it's set in a remote asylum for the criminally insane run by the strange and charismatic, well, I liked him, Dr. Callistratus, who conducts his experiments on the patients there. And there's two stories at play in this movie. Firstly, Dr. John Pierre, who is the protagonist, is wrongly imprisoned for medical malpractice, so he's sent to the asylum. and he had done a blood transfusion, which apparently no doctor had ever been successful with at that time. And Dr. Callistratus, who was accused of being a vampire, and he was killed by the local pitchforkers, and he now runs this local asylum for the criminally insane. And his sidekick, Carl, had a doctor bring Dr. Callistratus back to life through I think it was through a transfusion, which was botched up. And this left Callistratus alive, but with a strange blood disorder due to this messed up transfusion, where he was given 2 different blood types, which destroy and eat each other, and left him needing to have regular transfusions in order to stay alive. Now, Callistratus saw the potential in the wrongly imprisoned Dr. John Pierre, and he uses him to help with his experiments to cure his own disorder. And alongside this, Callistratus uses forced transfusions from the inmates in his prison hospital to feed his body. And I thought that there was a bit of a homage to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein within that film, bringing the doctor back to life and the strange experiments. And anyhow, speaking of Shelley's, Thomas's favourite retro squeeze, Barbara Shelley, is in the film, and she is Dr. Pierre's fiancée, and she's doing everything she can to get her husband's unfair conviction reversed and released from the asylum. And she goes to the asylum and somehow manages to become employed as a maid. And Callistratus's deformed henchman, Carl, who's played by Victor Madden, falls in love with her, and eventually his loyalties are tested to the max towards the end of the film. Now, although the film has nothing to do with vampires, and there's no fangs whatsoever in the movie, apart from the vicious prison guard dogs who spend the film snarling and gnashing their teeth at everyone, it's set in Transylvania, and the asylum looks very much like Dracula's castle. And there were lots of famous actors in this from that time in 1958, so yeah, in the late 50s, early 60s. And I saw Bernard Bresslaw in there and a few others that you're going to recognise but might not remember the names of from the 60s British TV and film. And it's entertaining, and I like this kind of old horror film. It's nostalgic, and it makes a great late night Friday vintage horror film, like those that we'd watch as kids for a treat on the Friday night double bills on TV back in the day. And you could even go a level deeper than it just being entertaining and realise that the 2 lead characters, the villain, Dr. Callistratus, and the protagonist, Dr. Pierre, actually had a lot in common and under different circumstances probably could have done great work together. Dr. Pierre was wrongly convicted and sent to the asylum for life, and Callistratus was wrongly accused of being a vampire by the locals and killed, and then subsequently brought back to life. So you couldn't really blame him for turning into the villain that he became. So it's an 8 out of 10 for me. A typical horror of the time with a good cast. The script was a bit poor and it was a bit cheesy in parts, but that just added to the entertainment for me. And Donald Wolfett, dressed as Dr. Callistratus, for me anyway, had a slight Frankie Howard vibe to the character, which I also liked. So 8 out of 10.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, this one. It's hard to put a beat on it, really. You think you're going to be watching a Hammer type film, but it's not really. It's made by an American studio in England, so it has that lushness to it almost. So they obviously have more money to spend. And again, the story's a bit strange. I don't know why they called it anything like vampires, because it's not really a vampire film. It's more of a mad doctor, mad scientist type film, like I said, Frankenstein. The amount of people from the Carry On movies in there is hilarious. You can actually count them, and they're all like British 1960s actors and actresses. I came across it by accident. I never even heard of it. I was looking at Barbara Shelley's bio on Wikipedia, and it came up. And I very much enjoyed it, actually. I thought it was a good film. I thought it was a very human film. It had a very human quality to it. You really felt for this poor woman that her husband was locked up for life in prison, and the letter that was to say that he had been wrongly convicted had been intercepted and hidden. So the man was in prison for totally wrongly in every way. I really liked the character who played his cellmate when he first arrives in the prison slash asylum, and that scene where he gets eaten alive by the dogs is quite gruesome. I found that scene very quite dark. For a film like what's it 1959 or something. It's quite old. Yeah, Barbara Shelley is just great at being Barbara Shelley as she always is. She was quite younger. She almost like a girl in the film. But the film is very enjoyable, and regardless of, it looks great. It runs along nice. It's very simplistic in some ways, but kind of complicated in the other. The part where they're doing the science and he's showing the different blood types killing the other blood type under the microscope slide. That was pretty clever how that was all done, the animation they used and everything. Yeah, I would probably give it an 8 out of 10. I probably wouldn't even give it 8. I'd probably give it 7. But it's definitely worth watching. It's definitely an enjoyable film. There's nothing in there not to like. But at the same time, there's nothing in there that will blow you away. So as you said, it's a good, if you're looking for something to do, the film is a good film for that reason. Just watch it, and it might be one of those films where I watched it again down the road, I might get more out of it. But yeah, I would say it doesn't do exactly what it says on the tin regarding its title, but it does deliver the goods in terms of that genre. And it's also it's almost melodramatic, costume theater. It always feels like somebody watching Gone with the Wind and Scarlett O'Hara or something like that. But yeah, it's a good film. I would definitely recommend it.
Yeah, it's very Gone with the Wind. Yeah, the costumes and the sets. I really liked the sets. And you got to remember, it was 1958. It was back in the time when I don't think they used green screens then and things like that. I think it was actual sets, built from balsa wood or cardboard or whatever. But the paintings and everything on the sets, it was really, really good. And it kind of had, inside the asylum with all the brick walls and everything, it kind of had an Oliver feel to me, like in Fagin's Boys in the children's home in Oliver. So it just kind of was very Victorian.
Barbara Shelley was dressed like Scarlett O'Hara.
Yes, she was. She had a bonnet on, didn't she?
Yeah, and that film came out around that time, and that film was a massive rage, a huge success back when that film came out. So they were trying to probably cash in on the Scarlett O'Hara kind of thing. And she was an English actress as well in real life, Vivien Leigh.
It had a bit of everything. It had a good set, costumes. It was melodramatic in places. It was even a prison break film, bit of action, homage to Frankenstein, mad professor sort of thing, weird experiments going on down in the basement, and botched up blood transfusions. It had everything. Yeah, it was really entertaining.
And I have to say, the makeup on Carl with the one eyeball down here, I thought that was very well done. That was very plausible and believable.
Yes, he kind of, they did him like the Elephant Man a little bit, didn't they? But with the eyeball kind of hanging down.
Hunchback of Notre Dame and her being Esmeralda. Yeah, they definitely dipped into many palettes to get ideas for that film.
But it worked. It was, like I say, it was like, I don't know about over in Ireland, but over here in the late 70s, early 80s, BBC Two used to be the double bill on a Friday, usually a Hammer double bill, but it was always a horror film. And it was always a big treat to be allowed to stay up. I think they started about 9 o'clock and they finished about 11:30, midnight. And we was always allowed to stay up and watch them, which is where my love of horror films came from, really.
Yeah, in the part of Ireland I lived in, we could get British TV from across the sea. So I used to watch those double features. They actually started about 10 and ran to about 1. I think they're on BBC Two.
Yeah, BBC Two. Yeah, it may have been. We was allowed to stay up to watch it, though. It was a good treat if we'd behaved,
Yeah, they showed a lot of classic Hollywoods ones as well, like Cat People, ones from the old Universal monster ones. I can remember between the two films, the voiceover on the BBC would say something like, well, you can come down from the mantelpiece now and make a cup of tea because we have Christopher Lee and Dracula, Prince of Darkness next.
Yeah, and all the old Boris Karloffs used to be put on and things like that.
All that stuff. And I think I saw, that was my introduction to those films. I never seen things like, I remember being very taken back by The Werewolf, with Lon Chaney. I remember being really, that was the first time I really saw kind of like the Gothic aesthetic. The film had tremendous sets, and it was the first time, when you're growing up, there's a film, you'll see it, and it makes you think differently about films. Like, they're not just, like, I remember when I saw, like, I saw The Godfather young, and made me realize, films are more than just stories. There's other things going on. Well, the werewolf film with Lon Chaney, the first one, The Wolfman, I think it was called, that one, that was the first film I watched where I became acutely aware of the aesthetic, artistic quality of a film, how sets looked and how it could be made look, and how atmospheres create the true artwork and stuff. I found those films are very educational to me, actually, though, that double feature on the Saturday night.
There was a movie, a black and white one, The Beast with Five Fingers. I don't know if you remember that. It was about a dismembered hand with a ruby ring on it, and that would go crawling around. Yes. And it was not so much the story or the hand crawling around. When the hand crawling around was bad enough, but it was the sets and the black and white and the costume and just the whole atmosphere that can make any horror film really stand out. So that was the 1958 Blood of the Vampire. Go and see it. It's on YouTube, actually, so I'll put the link in the description, or no, actually, I'll put the link in one of the comments, and you can click on there and have a watch if you fancy it. If you've seen it, let us know what you think about it, and if you plan on watching it, then please do come back to the comments and let us know what you think. It's got a little bit of everything. You won't be disappointed.
Well, we're now on the other side of the famous North American eclipse, and everyone survived it. As a bead of darkness ran from the Gulf of Mexico, well, actually from the Pacific all the way here to the west coast of Ireland, but it really hit home right across America. It definitely did leave a little bit of a weird impact in its way. Lots of us were feeling a bit unsettled afterwards. So maybe for the next one that comes along, we can get some psychic hygiene tips from Sarah that can actually help us to deal with these strange effects. And here's Sarah with the psychic weather. And here's Sarah with the psychic hygiene tips.
I'm leaving that in. I'm going to leave that in. Right, this month I want to focus on maintaining good psychic hygiene in the middle of the waves of hysteria that sometimes sweep people away, especially during events like the recent solar eclipse. The hysteria for that was off the scale, and so much so that many people missed the opportunity to witness such a beautiful celestial event. So this month I want to talk about how to avoid getting caught up in the doomsday narratives and how to channel our energy into more constructive things. It's becoming more difficult to discern truth from sensationalism or outright lies in the media, and it's easy to be swept away by narratives that put shock value or clicks over any kind of substance, and we're constantly bombarded with negative headlines and fear. And yes, while it's important to stay informed about what's happening in the world, there does come a point when too much negativity can take its toll on our mental and emotional well-being. So there you are, sitting on your couch, flipping through channels or scrolling through your news feeds, what have you, and everywhere you look, it's doom and gloom, and it suddenly starts to feel like the world's weight is pressing down on your shoulders, and it feels suffocating. But, newsflash, no pun intended, you have the power to control what you consume. You have the remote control in your hand, and you have the phone in your hand, and you have the power to switch off the negativity, and you can set boundaries on how much of it you let into your life. And that might mean limiting your exposure to certain news outlets or social media platforms that tend to focus on the negative. And it might mean taking breaks from the constant stream of information and pings and blips on the phone and giving yourself time to recharge. But you're not obligated to subject yourself to a never-ending cycle of negativity. So why do it? I suppose the question is, what can you do to fill that gap of scrolling the news feeds on all the different platforms? Well, that is where the human superpower of creativity comes in. Now, whether it's painting or writing or cooking or playing music or some sort of creative expression, it does soothe the soul and it lifts the spirit. And when you're feeling overwhelmed, you can channel that energy into something constructive instead of being swept away by the chaos. So grab a paintbrush or put pen to paper, pick up your guitar, learn to play the guitar, or just stick on a CD of your favourite artist, and you could either just dance or let the music mentally take you someplace. The list is endless. And the beauty of creative expression is that it knows no bounds. And it doesn't matter if you're a professional artist or a novice doodler, or if you're a published author or someone who's not written anything more than a shopping list. What matters is that you express yourself unapologetically. So next time you find yourself feeling overwhelmed by all the doom and gloom, just stop. Your energy is precious and you have every right to protect it. So stop and turn on your critical thinking and instead choose discernment and creativity. And there's another part to this as well, because finding and curating a supportive and uplifting tribe is not just a luxury, but it's a necessity. And it's not about quantity, it's about quality and mutual respect. And we live in a world consumed by fear and paranoia. So making meaningful connections with like-minded souls is an act of radical defiance, if you like. So are the relationships in your life nourishing your soul and lifting you up, or are they dragging you down? Because if it's the latter, don't be afraid to let go and make room for new connections that are more in alignment with your own values. So seek out your tribe, nurture those connections, and together you'll weather life storms and be a comfort to each other during these dark times that we're currently living through. Good company and a creative hobby to focus on is going to be our life raft as we go forward. And that is my psychic hygiene suggestion for this month.
Yes, very important. It's almost one of those things like the company you keep at these times. Change yourself. Don't It's like that song by Camper Van Beethoven, "Take the Skinheads Bowling." It's that kind of thing. Like, do something healthy to distract from it. And I can, my lord, the hysteria over that eclipse was off the feckin' scale. It was unbelievable. I mean, it was fantastic entertainment for me. But there was truthers on there for literally 2 weeks nonstop. Were saying the rapture's coming, the rapture's coming. We're going to go rapture during the eclipse. And when it didn't happen the next day, not a word about it. Not a word about it. After it was worse than 2012. Not a word about it, and no one holds them accountable. No one says to them, "You said the rapture was coming yesterday for 2 weeks and it didn't come." What? They just move on to the next hysteria, the next adrenaline, the next whole thing. How anyone could find anything terrifying about an eclipse is we're back to the growth. We're back to the Abrahamic thing, aren't we? Again, that's all growing again, especially in the alternative scene. And so those fears are all creeping in, that irrational fear of nature. And I mean, how anyone could. I mean, I've never seen a full eclipse. I would absolutely love to one. I was actually jealous of all those people that saw it in America, and yet so many of them over there were going ballistic because it was passing through the Bible Belt and all that area. So a whole lot of that carry-on was getting whipped up into it, and I feel sorry for. Imagine being a kid who's normal and you're in a family where they're all like that. Jesus, it must be awful. But yeah, the thing is that when that kind of hysteria comes in and takes over, like you said, get away and do something creative. That's the actual. I think that happened a lot during the lockdowns and the Rona and all that stuff. I think a lot of us became kind of like hermits because of the hysteria and the hype and the madness around those periods. I know what I have. I really don't like going out much anymore in public. And you were saying the same yourself last week as well. That affected me that way. And I don't want to be around these people ever, if I can help it, or much, because they've really shown how dangerous and ridiculous they are when they have these perceived phobias or fears. So yeah, I mean, get away from them and do something fun or nice.
There was something that crossed my mind with the eclipse. Maybe you might have a thought about it as well. And it was complete mass hysteria, like you said. And imagine the psychic charge that's created. And is that possible that it's created some form of egregore or tulpa or something like that,
There's also the possibility that some dark, and it's happened before, that some dark occultic groups deliberately whip up the hysteria in order to grab the charge. I think that Trump binding spell from 2017 or wherever it was, I think that was actually generated by some dark occultist. And all those people that took part in it, so many would have sacrificed their lives or their mental health, because you never curse someone that never did any personal harm. It will always come back to you. And I think that whole thing that night where you had to burn the tower card and all this stuff, and there were all these like people with TDS all doing it that night, and that was definitely, I'm absolutely convinced, like the water bucket challenge, that was also a ritual of some kind. If it was definitely a social experiment. There's no doubt about that, absolutely. And you can draw a straight line between the Rona and that. Bang on. It was a test to see how many would actually do when it came to Mother Hyde's babies. But I think that was also a ritual as well. And in fact, we're going off topic here a bit, but that's hocus pocus. There is that ritual from ancient Greek magic of the headless ritual, the bornless ritual, where you invoke an entity that has no head, and it helps you get into other realms and into other domains and realms and stuff like that. And the world did kind of, at the time, it did feel like a ritual, and I often wonder it was a mass ritual to open up the gates to bring in what came in during the Rona.
Yeah, I do feel like we might have. Well, it feels like we may have regressed back to the dark ages.
And I spoke about it recently on social media. Some people said, I know so many people who did the water bucket challenge, and terrible things happened to them and their families afterwards. Lots of deaths, lots of cancers, all kinds of other things. So there you go again,
Yes, food for thought. Stay away from the bandwagons and stay away from mass hysteria, and go and find something wholesome to do around the house, or create something.
When Terence McKenna said culture is not your friend, he wasn't talking about like the cultures of countries or anything like that. He was talking about things like the cultures of the pop culture or negative cultural developments and traits. Like the mob is never your friend, ever. Even if you're in the mob is never your friend. So it's the same kind of thing. Like when it's a toxic cultural trend, this is not your friend, stay away.
And on that note, that's the silver lining, isn't it? Because it's taught us a great lesson, and now we know that suburbia and pop culture and your neighbours and people that you thought you knew very well, they're not your friend, and they'll turn on you on a sixpence, and they've done it once and they'll do it again. So I'm all for being a hermit now and being very, very, very selective.
Yeah, it was a test, and most failed it. In summer 1985 in Ireland, something very strange happened, and it began in a village called Ballinspittle in the far south of Ireland in County Cork, when several people reported seeing a statue of the Virgin Mary in a grotto on the side of a hill there move. This was witnessed over time by many thousands of people, and it became a pilgrimage spot. But what was also interesting was that these statues were also being reported moving in other parts of the country. Now, you could put it down to these kind of phenomena that show up now and again around Marian shrines, where local cranks or attention seekers want to believe that the Virgin Mary has picked them out in a special way and they get a bit of attention and so on by the local holy rollers. But it wasn't like that at all. There were people who were very skeptical who claimed to have seen the statues moving. There were people who would not be given to this who claimed they saw it. Interestingly enough, the only ones that didn't seem to see it were members of the Catholic clergy, or at least they professed to have not seen it. One of the more interesting things that happened at Ballinspittle in the summer of 1985 was that a national TV crew went down from Dublin to film it. And the TV reporter and members of the crew said that they saw the statue moving, but it wasn't picked up on the videotape of the camera. Now, that's a very interesting thing by itself, and that's why this puts us into the world of the Fortean more than, say, a religious event. Because I know people that went down and saw these statues move, and not just a little finger or anything like this. Some people describe the statue as leaning forward where it should have fallen off the plinth, opening its hands apart, and gestures that would look beyond like a small thing, heads turning left and right and so on. Now, it became a controversial issue in Ireland where you had more atheistic people saying things like, well, it's obviously mass hallucination, or people of low intelligence like they normally do. But you even had Protestants who claimed that they saw the statues moving. You had one, it became so frightening to a certain Presbyterian, to a certain Protestant fanatical group that they actually started attacking the statues with hammers. There was other cranks as well, or jokers, who did things like put signs on statues of the Virgin Mary around the country with "out of order" written on them. Now, in the case of Ballinspittle, I have been there, and it is a very, very beautiful place. The grotto is built into the side of a hill, and this is where it gets really interesting. That hill has always been known locally for fairies, and indeed, there is an incredibly mystical sensation when you're on that hill beside the grotto. Even people who are not religious notice it. They say it has an otherworldly feel at this point. Now, similar to Fatima and Lourdes, the grotto is on a hillside that's actually covered in many, many caves. And this brings up another possibility that we have, that this could be the jinn. Now, we could understand the jinn appearing in Fatima because Portugal that at one time was part of the Iberian Caliphate, and Lourdes was actually invaded by the Moors at one point too. So you could say, well, there are Muslim intrusions. Well, there was Muslims intrusions in the past into that part of Cork. That coast was raided by Barbary pirates, who were basically Arab pirates from Algeria, who depopulated the southern coasts of Britain and Ireland in the 16 and 1500s. They would steal locals and take them away as white slaves. It was very, very common. And this is why the coastal areas of Northern Europe for many years, or decades, were depopulated essentially because it was so dangerous. Because you could be in the middle of the night, entire towns could be taken away. And that happened actually in Ireland a few times. So maybe the jinn came in through one of these Islamic raids in the 1600s, and as a result, ended up in the grottos in the caves at Ballinspittle. That's just a theory, one of many. It could be fairy activity, but I know people, very credible people, that went down there and said they saw the statue move. And then they claimed it was just mass hallucination. I really do believe those people were telling the truth. The fact that a TV company said that they all saw it and didn't videotape it, that's a very important Fortean overall piece of information, because it opens up the whole thing of scenarios surrounding, well, why do we never see clear images of UFOs or clear images of the Loch Ness Monster? Because of the disturbance in the field that somehow may be true. I don't know. I'm just speculating. Our own visual system, optic nerves, pineal gland, whatever, are able to perceive what electronic devices cannot pick up. And this would include the sensations, the incredible sensations. At one point, there were 30,000 people attending the grotto. After the apparitions, or not the apparitions, the
the movements would happen after 4 p.m. in the evening and often go on till dark. And summer in Ireland stays bright until near midnight. So they would be there all night long. So I do believe the Ballinspittle moving statue story is real. I don't know what it is. It's between genuinely was the Virgin Mary an immaculate kind of thing, to a jinn thing, to a fairy thing. Very credible people witnessed it. And then it just suddenly stopped out of the blue. Out of the blue, it just stopped. And it also affected compromised individuals who attacked it with a hammer because they said it was iconography and iconoclast stuff. So I think this is a very important subject that goes way beyond religious anything, just like the Marian apparitions do, because there are specifics about these events on the ground themselves that lend themselves to broader Fortean discussions, and that's why it's on Hocus Focus. So what do you think of the moving statues phenomena, Sarah?
What I found when I was researching these Marian apparitions is that they only seem to happen at places where there's an emotional attachment to her. So if Christianity really was the truth and everyone else was wrong, why does she only seem to appear to people of faith, and why doesn't she seem to show up within indigenous tribes of the earth or to Native American people? I mean, yes, she is said to have been seen in Mexico as Our Lady of Guadalupe in 1531, but Catholicism had already infiltrated the area because the Mexican territories were already under the Spanish Empire, and that was also known as the Catholic Empire back then. So is it a high psychic charge brought about by so many emotional believers who want to see something manifest to the physical eye as a vision of Mary, like an egregore or a tulpa perhaps? And do these things manifest into what the observer wants to see, like your man we was talking about last week and the head of the John Lennon head?
Yeah, I think definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
But there's another interesting thing about the Spanish. Sorry, sir. It's the Spanish thing into Mexico. Remember, Spain was at war, had only just conquered the Islamic Caliphate, and many of those people would have been Muslims or have had Muslim ancestry who went to, from the Iberian Caliphate, who went to the New World. So there's the jinn thing there as well.
Then,
also, Sorry, one more. There's also a very big Marian cult in Turkey among Muslims, believe it or not.
Well, she's held in really high regard in Islam, and she's known as Maryam or Mariam, and she's also in the Quran. So Marian devotion has a massive presence in various parts of the Islamic world, including the Middle East. And in Egypt, the Zaytun apparitions were sightings that took place in, let me just check my notes, April 1968, when a Muslim bus mechanic said he saw a woman dressed in white on top of the church's dome. And they actually got a photograph of this, which I put in the picture frame. And then on the following nights, there was an increase in these sightings and loads of crowds gathered to witness the phenomenon. And they described it as a luminous figure that looked like the Virgin Mary with doves and angels around the figure. And she appeared to move gracefully, and she was said to be bowing and raising her hands in prayer. And these apparitions lasted for several hours, so they weren't fleeting, and they were visible to all the large crowds that were gathered near the church. And everybody there who witnessed it said that they felt this peace and awe, regardless of what religion they were. And then there, after an investigation from scientists and the clergy, the church actually officially recognised the events as genuine manifestations of the Virgin Mary.
I've seen that photograph in a 14 book years ago, and it's really quite remarkable. And it was a Coptic church, I think, in Alexandria. So, the Coptic Christians are outside the Vatican, so it might have not been the Vatican who recognized it. It might have been the Coptic church. But that picture is astounding. Don't forget also that the Our Lady of Medjugorje is in Bosnia-Herzegovina, which is a Muslim country too. So it's interesting you have that crossover. See, that's what always makes me think the jinn as well, the two things. There's literally nowhere on earth that has had Marian apparitions that have been 2 or 3 steps away from jinn cultures, you know.
And not forgetting, Christianity was born in the Middle East. Jesus was said to have been born in Bethlehem, and he was known as Jesus of Nazareth. So there are lots of Marian pilgrim sites in the Holy Land too. And there's the Church of the Annunciation in the city of Nazareth in northern Israel. And that's one of the most significant Marian pilgrimage sites in the whole of the Holy Land. And according to Christian tradition, it's supposed to stand where the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary when he announced that she'd conceive and bear the Son of God. And then there's another place there, which is Mary's tomb in the Kidron Valley near the Church of the Sepulchre in Jerusalem. But its authenticity is debated, but many Christians still say that it's Mary's traditional burial place. But there's been no apparitions reported there. But I brought it up because there's a lot of Marian worship in the Middle East. And well, I'm going to be honest here, the whole idea of Christianity has always made me feel really uncomfortable. And I don't feel any connection to it. And it scares me, to be honest. And that's not because I think I should be on my knees repenting. It's because I don't like the thought of what I think is behind it. And I don't want anything to do with the Tetragrammaton or Yahweh or whatever it is. And I don't tend to go inside churches if I can help it, unless it's to have a look at something historical or some decor, some Gothic decor. And some people find them really comforting, but I just find the whole thing really creepy. And the thought of a Marian apparition actually is terrifying. I just don't like that at all.
Yes, and this Turkey as well. The birthplace of Virgin Mary is supposed to be in Turkey. My mother visited it. It's the house that she grew up in is supposed to be there. It's supposed to be. Well, they say it's the house that she grew up in, and you can actually go into it. My mother's been there, but I don't know how true that is. But a thing about the dark side of it, there was a dark element to what happened with the moving statue stories in Ireland. At the end, I think it was around the end of the summer, they were attacked by fundamentalist Protestants with hammers, and including the statue of Our Lady at Ballinspittle was smashed to pieces. So it brought that sectarianism thing to the surface again. And so it brought that. You often wonder if that force was there for that reason to cause these problems. And the thing with the dark side of it. So yeah, the only thing that I like is I like I was going to say I like folk Catholicism. If I was a Christian, I'd be a folk Catholic. But then that all comes from paganism anyway. So you're pagan as well. I just be calling myself a Catholic. It'd be like paganism with a little bit of Jesus, in the same way that a lot of Hindus have incorporated Jesus into their Hinduism.
Didn't the Protestants come along and destroy the statues of Mary because they were against something to do with idolatry? They didn't like the thought of them idolizing a statue.
Yeah, Marianology it's called. Marianology. It's very hard to say, which is the Marian statue version of idolatry. Yes, absolutely. They were nut jobs. They were. And they were they were from respectable backgrounds and stuff. One of them, I think, was a doctor or something. Now you think it'd be like communists who would have attacked the statues or something. No. So that force may have been designed to trigger sectarian problems between Catholics and Protestants. Like I said, the Tetragrammaton might have been working in its tricky ways,
And then you've got not only statues moving, but there's also been reports around the world of these Marian statues shedding tears of blood, and statues of Jesus as well, which I think is very, very creepy.
Oh, yeah. And I saw a very frightening video of a Jesus statue looking at a camera some guy was filming it in Mexico, and it had one of these, one of these awful sort of crucifixion statue type thing, and where it's kind of gory, and the eyes looked like they went like that and looked at the camera, and the guy dropped the camera. Oh, it's terrifying. It was before they had good digital and stuff like that. But what makes it go, and the camera drops. So he went like that. So that was a very frightening one. I had a phobia about the Virgin Mary as a boy. I saw a movie called, I've spoken this many times on my own channel, called The Song of Bernadette, about Saint Bernadette. It's a Hollywood film, and in the film, when the Virgin Mary appears, it's absolutely terrifying. It's beyond words frightening to me as a child. And years later, I was in my parents' kitchen, and there was a Sunday afternoon, and the film was on. And my parents aren't religious or anything like that, really. And I said, you know, when that film was on as a child, at the very end, the final vision of the Virgin terrified me. And he goes, really? And so we're sitting there at the end having a cup of tea. And then the Virgin Mary appears at the end, like there's a scene where the actress playing Bernadette goes, the lady is here. And there's the Virgin Mary with this glowing, ghostly image in the corner of the room. And my father went, Jesus, I could definitely see how that would terrify a child. So, so it was, I think I have a phobia around that thing. I did that whole Virgin Mary thing. I have a phobia around it. And but like I went down to Ballinspittle and I expected to feel that terror with my friend John, who lives down there. And I'd also had an accident the previous day where I nearly broke my leg slipping on a stone circle. So I was in pain, but I was expecting a real negative energy at Ballinspittle. No, it was lovely. It was a lovely, so beautiful. The rhododendrons and the other beautiful plants and everything. And then the statue. And I think I was picking up on the fairy aspects of it.
Could also be because the tetragrammaton wasn't working through that area at that point. It was just at that point in 1985. Yeah, it had gone. Yeah, I'm not a fan of religious statues, Christian religious statues. I don't like to see Jesus on the crucifix with the face looking up. That terrifies me, and I don't.
Or the Stations of the Cross. I don't know if you're Catholic, but we had the Stations of the Cross when we were kids. That's the paintings around the church of him being whipped and everything. And you're supposed to stop at each one and feel the suffering of Jesus. And by the end, you're traumatized if you're like any way a sensitive child or something.
See, I don't like that. I'm quite happy to just stick with paganism and get out into nature and appreciate nature. I just can't get behind that at all. I just don't understand it, and I don't want to understand it. I respect anybody who has that belief and that faith. That's great, but it's just not for me. I don't know why I feel so adverse to it and why it frightens me so much. I don't know, and it's not fear of needing to repent. It's just something instinctual inside me says you stay away from that.
Well, we've covered the Marian apparition outside the moving statues on Hocus Pocus in the past. And what happened to the little children at Fatima and also St. Bernard? They all died young of cancers and awful things. That to me is like indicative of messing with the occult. People are involved in the occult unknowingly. They'll get cancers and things like that, or they'll die young and and that's just like there's so much darkness around, and you're supposed to think it's beautiful and spiritual and peaceful. It's not. It's this awful darkness around it.
Yeah, it's all about repenting all the time and paying for original sin, and because of how you came here, so you get blamed for your parents' original sin, and you're going to repent for that for the rest of your life, and you're going to suffer, and you're going to say Hail Marys and go to confession and just feel guilty all throughout your life for any pleasure or anything. And that just doesn't resonate with me, that, because like you say, the world, even in dark times like this, the world itself is still a beautiful place. There's lots of forests and nature and natural law and the moon in the sky even that we talked about earlier. There's so much beautiful stuff around if people just open their eyes and stop being afraid of dogma and going to hell and things like that, and just start living instead of spending it on the knees repenting because some man in a dark frock and a white collar in an old building on a pagan site, I might add, tells you that if you don't, you're going to spend eternity in hell.
No, yeah, I know. I just think I have those idiots have no effect on me. I I don't even pay it any mind. That it's like I've absolutely been not anti-Christian, de-Christianized since I was about 12, like completely. I mean, no fear of anything, retribution or no anything like that. Knew it was the devil and all that was nonsense. The hell was all lies and all that stuff. And I've been clean of that since I was 12. But there are so many people who go through their lives thinking they're going to burn in hell for things they did in their lives, and I think that's evil.
Me too, yeah. The programming, or the brainwashing rather, runs really deep, and it's almost cult mentality. And it's very difficult for people to break away, even if they wanted to, because they've got that fear that something might happen to them.
Remember the unbaptized babies? They had to be buried in different graves. They weren't allowed in the regular cemetery, and they didn't go to heaven. They went to purgatory because they had original sin. So there's like not only has the mother lost the child, she has to live with the fact that she won't. If she's religious, she won't meet the baby in heaven. Now, what kind of loving God is that's evil?
Here, we were told that if you didn't have the baby christened, then it would be a very sickly baby and probably die. So no, it's not for me that.
And you know that whole thing with the christening is a big business for churches and parishes. That's serious. Christenings are a serious money thing for parishes, and the schools as well. Because like the fee paying schools, a lot of them in Ireland are Catholic, and you can't get into them unless you're. So it's a big money thing as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of money in the church, isn't there? It's probably one of the richest establishments in the world.
Oh, I'll tell you something about the Sisters of Mercy. The Sisters of Mercy here were selling about 15 years ago. I did a a craft fair, and the Sisters of Mercy were selling junk, basically tat, bric-a-brac, to raise money for children in somewhere there's an earthquake or something. And they were sitting on something like £2 or £3 billion or euros worth of property in central Dublin alone, 2 or 3 billion. And here they were expecting people to give them money. You know, it's unbelievable. You know, the whole thing. So there you go. Both Sarah and I have just declared ourselves to be sinners, but we're still interested in the Marian apparitions, and we're still interested in folk Catholicism and the links between paganism and Christianity and all that kind of thing. So what I would like to hear, if any of you in Ireland were either as kids at Ballinspittle or any of the other Marian shrines where the statues moved, your parents or your uncle or your aunt was at them, if you have those stories about them, I'd love to hear it, because I've heard the ones that I've heard were very convincing. I really do believe something happened. I mean, but it's true 40 an event. But I think I never really thought about the dark end of it until Sarah mentioned that perhaps the other share of Christians from the other side of the family attacked the statues. That maybe the darkness of the Jehovah, or the super tetragrammaton of the Old Testament, the Demiurge, was trying to whip up sectarian violence to feed off the charge. Or it was the jinn from Islamic incursions. Let us know what you think, and I think it's a fascinating subject, and I think I'm actually going to study it a lot more from now on. My interest has definitely been piqued, and I want to look into it from a very Fortean point of view. So, stay tuned to this.
Let's see if the moon's cosmic vibes have any relevance to how the psychic weather is going to be this month. Is it going to be moonbeams and fluffy kittens, or lunatics and dirty mittens? Hey, what do you want? I'm actually ad-libbing this, so it's over to Thomas. Somewhere amongst the beautiful landscape on the northwest coast of Ireland, it's time for the psychic weather.
The word on my gaff, and the psychic weather
in this month. It's not too glamorous either. The demon world seems to be invading this world. I'm seeing some very interesting, and other to note, some interesting manifestations of certain, should we say, corruptible individuals demonstrating identical pathologies and identical behaviors and attacks on certain things, often spiritual, at the same moment. It's most remarkable. There are a lot of empty vessels at the moment. They seem to be able to be invaded, whether they be politicians, civil servants, all those bureaucrat types, CEOs, alcoholics, people damaged by drugs or drug abuse, people that have a psychic firewall deficiency to no fault of their own, and so on, as well as the dark ones, or the sort of like corrupted NPCs as a result of the needlecraft. So it's manifesting everywhere, on the roads, on everything. And we all, some of us, not all of us, but some of us will have an effect on others in our lives that will be attractive or considered must be destroyed by the demon, the entities, the beings, the low-level beings. They will invade the compromised ones around the list I just mentioned in order to get at you. So be very careful. If you see very strange behavior, people that you know don't like you, or kind of like a Renfielding with a nasty element, it's probably low-level entities entry. Why it's happening this moment, I just don't have a clue, but it is happening. And the best thing to do is, the classic thing, don't engage. Don't engage with a demonically possessed or compromised individual, because this is what the entity inside them gets in there through weed, a meditation, needlecraft, cognitive decay. Once, you might often find that if you're in that situation, that the roads might be dangerous. You'll notice that you might see very aggressive driving around you, and so you need to be really careful on the roads. So don't engage, and be careful on the roads, and you'll be okay. Simple as that. Don't get all upset at it. So I'll see you next time, and back to the studio.
And now let's go into the library for this week's book reviews, where we're going to pick up a book from our collection and indulge in a bit of show and tell with the aim of inspiring your own bookshelves. So be sure to keep your eye on those shelves behind us, because you never know who might scurry by or drop in unannounced. And my book this week is The Occult by Colin Wilson. I'm just going to quickly show it there and put it down, because it's going to be an absolute bugger to produce because of the colour of it and the screen behind. Now, it's a fascinating book about the mysterious and often misunderstood world of the occult, and it was first published in 1971. And it's full of detailed anecdotes and philosophical insights and personal reflections of the author, Colin Wilson. And he dives into several sections, and each section of the book focuses on a different aspect. And he goes through historical roots of occultism, from ancient civilizations such as Egypt and Babylon to the Renaissance period, and up to modern times insofar as 1971 when the book was written. And he also looks at the various schools of thought within the occult, including alchemy, mysticism and theosophy. And he writes about the lives and teachings of influential occult figures such as Paracelsus, Gordiano Bruno and Aleister Crowley. And he writes about various occult practices, alchemy, astrology, divination, magic, and he goes into the beliefs behind these practices as well as their relevance in modern times. But what I found most interesting and enjoyed the most was Wilson's idea of faculty X, which he describes as a latent human ability that allows individuals to tap into higher levels of consciousness and perception beyond the ordinary sensory experience. And he believes that Faculty X is a potential evolutionary leap for humanity, which can give insights into the nature of reality and the mysteries of existence. And he says that mystics and artists and visionaries all have shown glimpses of this faculty throughout the creative endeavours. And according to him, these people have a sensitivity to the subtle energies and dimensions of reality that escape the perception of conventional people, the normies, if you like. And he says that Faculty X is the key for transformation and self-realization of who we are and the nature of reality, and how through meditation and creative expression we can all harness this faculty to expand consciousness. But first, we have to learn how to eliminate the fear of what others think and go beyond the limitations of everyday perception. And the Faculty X is the overall arc of the book, and I found it really interesting, especially since many of us have found our own Faculty X when we were faced with the Rona and everything that brought with it. And he also writes about his own personal journey into the occult, and he gives his perspectives on the subject, and he recounts his experiments with psychokinesis and his encounters with self-proclaimed occultists. Now, having said all that and sang its praises like that, it's not the easiest book to read, and it takes a while to digest, but he does manage to bring a number of aspects of the occult into an understandable whole subject. I think they call that synthesizing, where an author takes a really complex idea and then presents it clearly and easily. And the reason it takes so long to read is that it does come in at over 700 pages, and there's so much of it, and also a lot to think about as you go along. So for me, I found that as I read a few pages, I then had to stop because I needed to think about what I just read and just digest it. And he did a lot of research for the book from historical texts, philosophy and personal interviews, and he looks into the occult from lots of different perspectives. One of the reasons I like Wilson's work is that he never approaches the subject with a narrow mind or dogmatism, and he also asks the readers to think critically and question their own assumptions about the occult and make your own conclusions. So the book has some flaws, and in my personal opinion, it was a bit too verbose and often went off on tangents, which was a bit frustrating because it disrupted the flow of the reading, and at times it felt like being in a deep conversation about something interesting and then someone coming along and interrupting it with something irrelevant. And I do understand that authors need to provide details to flesh out the subjects, but in this case, I felt it was a bit overdone in some parts. There's many things in this book that you might disagree with too, but it's one of those books where you can take what you need and disregard what you don't need, and it has lots of personal anecdotes and reflections that might not appeal to those who are more interested in a purely academic approach to the occult. But overall, I enjoyed the book and Wilson's open-mindedness. Now, one last thing, my copy of the book was purchased a long time ago and is a second-hand book. And as I was reading it, I found that the previous owner had scribbled some notes in the book's margins, and they caught my attention because they contradicted the book's content and showed the previous owner's frustration with it. And it was really funny to read the angry comments that this owner had written, disagreeing with Wilson on all kinds of points. He was kind of having an imaginary argument with the author, and they were written at a time when social media comments obviously didn't exist. So the previous owner was essentially trolling himself, and I just found it quite comical that trolling was once a solitary practice within the margins of a book. Anyway, that's my book for this month, The Occult by Colin Wilson.
It sounds like the angry letter writer to a newspaper. Do you know the story behind that book? He was he was contracted to write a book to debunk the occult, and he ended up becoming a firm believer. So much so that he wrote that 700-page one, and then another one after called Beyond the Occult. I think I have the same problem with you. They're both too big, those books, but they are useful. They are good reference books because they both have excellent indexes in them. So I've found that the indexes are great in them. So, but that's just so interesting. I love that story about the guy with the angry letter writer, the angry margin writer. My book this week is Explore Fairy Traditions by Jeremy Hart. Now, this is the best book I've read on the overall subject: introduction, discussion, taxonomy, study, cultural, social history, fairy and fairy folklore. It's great read. It's really good. It's written in a very convincing manner. It has some very nice, interesting artwork as well. It covers fairy traditions, where they came from, what's the other world, different types of fairies, but it's not done in a kind of pictorial way like some of those lovely books you've shown. It's just purely diving in into the fairy tradition thing. It's really well written. It's very enjoyable, and it's still the best book that I've read on just an introduction to the fairies, fairy folk, and the taxonomy and all that kind of thing. So explore. There's nothing really much to say because that's really all it does. It has some a really good section on the Lian and Shi. So explore fairy traditions, Jeremy Hart. It's not very thick, but it's small print, and I'll show you some of the artwork. It's got these kind of like line drawing type things. You'll see it on the other camera, but there. Lots of pen and ink drawings, not lots, but like different bits like this. So that's my book this week, and a short, easy review.
Does it come at the fairies from a fairy tale point of view, or does it go into how you don't mess with them, that kind of thing?
All that stuff, and the kind of cultural things. Lots of stuff about fairies in Ireland, that part of it. It's not a huge amount of Irish stuff in it, but not just Ireland. And fairies and magic, fairies and illness, fairies and anger, and their relationship to like psychological states, and fairies that live in the home, the domesticated fairies. No, yeah, it's really good. There's fairies and marriage, supernatural relationships with fairies. A lot of Yeats stuff in it. A lot of W.B. Yeats stuff in it. So yeah, so it's got it all really.
Excellent. I shall check that out. Thank you.
So I hope you enjoyed this week's show. We had a few technical issues, and so it's not a big, long show like last week, but we got spoiled last week, so you can have a slightly shorter one this week. And I hope we've given you food for thought, fodder for the mind. We've opened up your 40 horizons, and you're enjoying the new format of the show as much as we are, being immersed inside that world. And yes, keep the comments coming, keep sharing it, banging it out on social media, tell people about the show, and thanks for being part of the conversation and still here.
Yeah, I echo what Thomas said. Thanks for your support. Thanks for all your subscribes, and thanks for all your shares and all the awesome comments about the new look to the show and the backdrop. That really, really makes me happy that you like the new look. So thank you.
What card have you got for us this month?
For this month's tarot, I have the 8 of Cups. Now, the 8 of Cups shows a man wearing a red cape with his back turned to 8 neatly stacked cups behind him, and the image represents a moment of departure and change as the man journeys away from the familiar. His red cape symbolises his inner strength and ability to manifest his intentions, and is a sense of purpose and determination that guides him as he goes through his uncertain path. And the moonlight illuminating his way signifies intuition and instinct that's guiding him. And the man is walking and going with the flow of the river too, which shows his willingness to follow the natural rhythms of life. and his departure is at the exact right time, and the barren mountains looming in the distance show unknown challenges and opportunities that await him on his journey, and the element of risk and adventure that comes from following or creating a new path in life. Now, he's got his staff there in his hand to support him, and that's very similar to the hermit's wisdom, and he has a sense of self-reliance as he confronts future uncertainties ahead of him. And the carefully stacked cups left behind show a sense of care and attention. All the loose ends have been tied up, and the decision to move on has not been made lightly. There's been a lot of deliberation, and he realises that he's exhausted all possibilities in whatever his current situation may have been. And the Eight of Cups also can mean boredom or stagnation in your current circumstances, despite external experiences suggesting otherwise, and you might wonder why you feel like this, or you might try to ignore it and push it away. But deep down, your intuition is telling you to embrace change and seek new opportunities for growth, rather than stay trapped in situations that no longer serve your highest good. And this card is about things coming to a natural end, and accepting this and knowing whether there's anything more to be done in a situation, and when it's time to let go gracefully and move on without any drama or any bad feelings. It could be as big of a decision as changing countries or relocating to a new home, or it could be something on a smaller scale, such as a new career or job, or the end of a project, or a collaboration, or leaving a group of familiar friends in order to go off and do your own thing.
Yeah, the card is also suggests unfinished business. I often got that impression of it. I think there's some interpretations have said that it's like you've achieved, you've got some stuff, but you're not finished yet. So you've got to go on a journey to complete the full task. So I've always kind of liked that aspect of it too. It's a very artistically, it's a very attractive looking card as well.
Would that be because there's a gap on the cups on the top row, so he's gone off to go find that missing cup and get the full set?
Exactly, it's something like that. Or it's if you're researching a project and you get that card, well, you haven't really done enough research yet. You've got to dig that back into it. Or if it's a failing relationship, that could mean you've got to try one more time to make it work, or that those kinds of things. The journey isn't finished yet, so don't end it at this point.
Right. Yeah, and I suppose which way you would look at it really would be dependent on what other cards came out with it as well.
Always, you never do one card on its own ever. You need at least three to get the reading. Good night, everybody.
Good night, and we will see you next month, which is June, the first Sunday of the month in June, and we'll be heading into midsummer before you know it. See you next time.
Ginger fairies.